Welcome explorers. Today, dive into this thrilling TTP narration of Ghosts in the Avalanche by Banancake, an ongoing fan-made book from the Nature of Predators series by Spacepaladin15 on r/HFY. If you are new here, I recommend listening to the Hunting with Predators series before you listen to this one.
Memory transcription subject, Vickery, the honey badger. Date, standardized human time May 14, 2137, 209 days after the Battle of Earth. Chapter 1, Dukes of Horseshoe Flats. I clutched a human rifle in my paws, shaking with untapped primal fear as I pinned my back against a tall pine tree. The shadows of the winter night closed in around me as snow whipped about in the moaning winds. Every breath I took felt like fire in my chest. I'd spent an intangible amount of time running through the same forest, past the same trees and rocks for an eternity. My legs couldn't carry me anymore. Crimson blood stained my face and chest. It clearly wasn't mine. I pressed my head against the tree, taking ragged breaths as the blizzard raged. Thunder crackled in the distance as I composed myself, summoning the will to make a stand. I gripped the rifle and stepped out from behind the tree, confronting my pursuer. The storm suddenly went silent. The snow stopped falling. The trees stood upright once more. The snow glowed white as the moon once again pierced through the clouds above. I panted as I watched the forest in front of me, overtaken by eerie silence. The shadows were impenetrable, only scattered by moonlight shining between the gaps in the canopy above. My eyes were doing me little good. My ears shot up as I heard something in front of me, the familiar crunching of snow underfoot. I tracked the sound in the darkness before my body went numb. My vision expanded as the moonlight reflected off a pair of eyes in the darkness, painting them in a ghostly white glow. Suddenly, an unexplainable sense of recognition fell over me. With it came an overwhelming sense of dread. The fight I'd summoned vaporized in an instant, rising with my rapid breaths into the night sky. Without a second thought, I dropped the rifle in the snow and ran as fast as I could. I screamed as footsteps rapidly closed in behind me, and I felt hot air on the back of my neck. The muscles in my neck and back violently contracted as I shot up from my bed, tearing into the fabric beneath me with my claws. I gasped. It felt as though I hadn't breathed in hours. A tingling sensation coursed through limbs and spine before fading just as quickly. I panted as my eyes adjusted to the morning sun beaming through the windows. I looked around at the dark wood floors of the room. A desk on the far side of the room was half buried in assorted electronics, many of which were disassembled. The off-white walls around me were decorated with assorted pictures and frames. I'm in my room. I relaxed slightly, leaning back against the soft pillows behind me as I put a paw over my chest. I reached over and grabbed a watch from the table next to me. The text on the small display read, 9:23. I leapt out of the bed, placing the watch over my wrist. The device automatically contracted to fit perfectly. I walked out of the room into a small living space outfitted with appliances of Venlo make. I hurried to the front door, grabbing my poncho on the way out. I stepped out into the harsh morning sun. A cool breeze washed over my face, and the green and gold blades of grass around me waved gently in its wake. I hurried across a dirt road to a barn on the other side. Behind it, a mountain range rested on the horizon, surrounding the vast fields with a wall of earth and alpines. I ran to the doors and heaved as I pushed them open. I stepped inside and immediately jumped to the side as a shovel clattered from the wall onto the ground next to me. I frantically looked around the barn as I placed the shovel back into its mount. Inside was an old tractor, most of which had been taken apart. Chains hung down from the rafters, swaying gently in the breeze seeping through the windows high above. A large workbench dominated the far wall, holding an array of neatly organized tools. I walked inside and looked into every hole and crevice. No, 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 no. I groaned. I ran back outside and toward the fence line. Beyond it, a lush, golden field of wheat rustled in the summer breeze. I whistled loudly, so loudly that I had to hold down my ears for fear of damaging them. The high-pitched sound dissipated into the open air, floating away in the wind. I perked my ears up and listened. Nothing. I kicked a nearby rock on the dusty dirt road. Damn it. I placed my paws on my head as I looked out into the field. I stood there for a few seconds before I heard a human voice behind me. What's all the commotion, neighbor? I turned around to see Andrea standing on her front porch. Her brown hair was frizzled and wild. She'd apparently just gotten up. She wore fuzzy pajamas and a white t-shirt draped over her caramel skin. She squinted at me in the light of the bright morning sun. Oh, sorry, Andy. Have you seen Lucky? I asked somewhat desperately. Andy looked up with her eyes and squinted her face slightly. Not since yesterday. Doesn't she usually go out before dawn? Yes, but I really needed her to stay in the barn today. I've got to go get my sister from the spaceport, and I don't want, I sighed. I wanted to make sure Lucky didn't freak her out, but I can't do that if she's out there. I tapped the screen on my watch, bringing up the GPS tracker on her collar. Andrea leaned forward over the railing. That's today. I nodded. She stood up and smiled, shaking her arms around as she shuffled in place. Oh, this is excitithing, she squeaked, holding back the urge to shout. I'll help you find Lucky. Let's go get the four-wheeler. Lucky was all the way on the other end of the farm, miles away. I don't have time, I sighed. I overslept, I'm already gonna be late. I need to get to Vancouver. Vancouver, huh? Quite a drive. I paced for a moment. I told her I'd be there. She's never been to Earth, she was so nervous. Now she's gonna be at the spaceport all alone, damn it. I already messed this up. I felt my heart rate quicken and my head become slightly numb. I stopped pacing, leaning over slightly as I caught my breath. Andy leaned back over the railing, concern creasing her face. When do you gotta be there? I took in a deep breath. In a couple of hours. There's no way I'm getting there in time. I clasped my paws over my face. I should probably start thinking of what I'm going to tell her. Andy smiled. Save your excuses for another time, Fluff. She stepped inside and came back out mere seconds later in a pair of jeans, boots, and the same t-shirt. She placed a blue ball cap on her head, hiding her nappy hair as she stepped out onto the road. Come on. Let's go to the ranch. I mumbled under my breath. Fluff. I jogged up beside her. What's at the ranch? Andy took a set of keys from her pocket and jingled them around. A neat little toy I don't get to take out nearly enough. Car? I asked, perplexed. That's how I was going to get there. She snickered. This car will actually get you there on time. I looked up at her, still slightly confused. You're going to drive me over there? Humans hardly ever drove themselves anywhere. Almost every vehicle on the road was autonomous. Andrea placed her hands in her pockets and shrugged. Yeah. Why not? It's a pretty long drive. I don't want to put you through that on your day off. Andy looked over at me. Hey. We're neighbors. Dad always said, love thy neighbor as thyself. I got nothing better to do today anyway. I snickered. Did your dad speak in Old English a lot? She laughed. It's a Bible verse, goofball. I laughed with her. I know. I've heard Garrett say it before. Huh. Yeah, he would say stuff like that. She turned around as she walked in front of me, holding her arms out slightly. Besides. You've been here, what? 2 weeks? Since the beginning of the month, yeah. Andy walked backward for a few steps in front of me. 2 weeks and we haven't hung out. I never even see you at the farm, all cooped up in that garage. I scratched the back of one of my ears. I guess we haven't, it's been a little hectic getting settled in here. It's not that I didn't want to, it's just, I've been really busy. Andy walked by my side once more. Her tone became more serious. It's all right. Can't be easy for a Venlil to learn how to make a life here. Plus, Garrett told me a few stories about you. I could understand someone wanting to keep to themselves after all that. If you'd rather not go with me, you can just say so. It won't offend me. Granted, I'd be a little disappointed, but I won't hold that against you. She wasn't wrong in guessing that I like to keep to myself. Interacting with humans could be stressful. News of what we'd gotten up to in Montana got around quick and got twisted in all kinds of ways just as quickly. Some people even seemed to believe that I killed that bear, which I mostly blamed Grant for. I could never know if someone would ask about Hamilton or the battle. Those weren't things I enjoyed talking about. I couldn't really blame them. Most who asked had just heard about me and hailed me as some kind of hero. They didn't know any better. Even things that weren't directly related to it, like, "So where did you find Lucky?" could make the conversation extremely awkward. That was part of the whole reason I moved here. I wanted somewhere quiet where I could just live for a while. I looked up from my musing. No. It's fine. It's nice to talk to someone who understands that. Andy smiled and nodded. Sweet. We entered a gate in the fence line that led to a large gravel lot surrounded by various buildings. A massive storage building took up the whole left side, while a barn, a garage, and a house sat on the right. Various farm equipment and vehicles were parked around the edges. The tall blades of grass surrounding us whistled in the wind as Andy led me to the garage. She threw open a shutter, and inside, a vehicle covered in a tarp sat surrounded by tools and jacks. I heard horses whinnying behind the barn as we stepped inside. "Wait, this is yours?" I asked. I'd spent a lot of time in this garage fixing farm equipment, and it had always been there in its own little section. Yep. Didn't really have anywhere to keep her at my house, so Mr. Garrett agreed to let me have this little space in the garage. She grabbed the tarp and pulled it away, gesturing to the car with both arms as if she were presenting it to an audience. Behold! My pride and joy. Under the tarp was a boxy, old-style muscle car. Old style as in centuries old. It had a fresh coat of sky blue paint that shined in the sun. The hubs were a mirror-finish chrome with large, barely treaded tires. I stood in front of the vehicle with my arms under my poncho for a moment. What model year is this? Andy slapped a hand on the hood, making a dense thud as she smiled. 1967, she declared proudly. My mouth fell agape as I looked over at her. You want to drive to Vancouver in a car almost 200 years old? Andrea propped herself up with her hand on the hood for a moment. She squinted at me for a few seconds before a smile slowly crawled across her face. She choked back a few giggles before doubling over and laughing. It's a replica, my fluffy friend. If it was actually that old, it'd probably be little more than a pile of rust by now. She chuckled a few more times before opening the door. It creaked as it swung past her. But she is built to spec. And she's fast. No electric engines, no fancy pants computer, just good old-fashioned horsepower. She set one foot in the car. I stood there, staring at her, unsure what to say. This car seemed like little more than an iron coffin on wheels to me, yet at the same time, I was curious to see what it could do. It tickled some engineering itch at the back of my mind. Andy sat down and slammed the door shut before poking her head out the window. Well? Get in, let's go get your sister. I took a deep breath before marching up to the passenger side and stepping inside. The interior was hot and muggy. The leathery plastic seats were a little uncomfortable compared to most human vehicles I'd been in. Not that I expected to be too comfortable for this trip. Andy turned the key in the ignition, and the engine revved to life, filling the garage with a deep, raspy thrum. I could feel the torque of the engine shaking the body back and forth slightly. Andy snapped her seatbelt over her chest, and I followed suit. She grabbed the steering wheel and eased the car out of the garage and onto the dirt road. Ready, Vic? I laughed nervously. I guess I was suddenly pinned against the seat as the car lurched forward, kicking up a giant plume of dust behind us as we quickly left the farm behind. The sound of the engine was deafening. I could hear every rock hitting the underpinning, every moving part in the transmission as Andy ran through the gears. It was terrifying. It was exciting. I was pinned against the door as Andy rocketed around the corner, just barely managing to keep the rear wheels out of a ditch. Andy continued down the straight for a moment before easing off the throttle. "Woo! You good?" she shouted over the engine. I caught my breath before looking over at her, laughing slightly. "Yeah. You weren't joking, this thing can really move." Andy smiled before getting back on the throttle. "Didn't take you for an adrenaline junkie, Fluff." "Why do you keep calling me?" I felt myself get lifted out of the seat as the car caught air over a small hill. The suspension rocked up and down as the tires met dirt again shortly after. Andy laughed at the stunned expression on my face. I continued holding on for dear life as we blazed down the dirt roads. Eventually, we hit paved backroads and, finally, the interstate. The ride returned to relative normalcy as we hit the smooth, wide roadway. Andrea was less aggressive but still kept a fast pace, weaving between automated vehicles across lanes. I caught my breath. That was terrifying. Any wrong move could have resulted in death for both of us. After so long in relative isolation, I'd forgotten what danger felt like. What adventure felt like. I leaned back against the seat, still panting. Andy looked over. "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah. It's just I haven't felt anything like that since, well, a long time. Being so close to death. Makes you feel alive?" Andy asked, resting one arm on the centrist as she leaned toward me. I chuckled. Something like that. I remembered clinging onto Grant's shoulders as he ran through the night after we survived the first wolf attack. I remembered being covered in orange blood while I looked up at the night sky, laughing. And I remembered what Tenga said. Death must be so pissed. I felt like that's where I'd started to change. It was the first time I'd stood my ground in the face of death, never leaving the human side. I never knew quite how to feel about the person I became afterward. Andy gently accelerated past a large, self-driving semi. "Don't take this the wrong way, but I thought most Venlil were timid. I was almost certain you'd at least ask me to slow down," she snickered. I scoffed. I thought about it. Andy turned a dial on the radio. Upbeat, percussive rock music started playing over the speakers. Of all the music I'd listened to on Earth, rock was by far the most human to me. Harsh and loud, but with its own unique, artistic intricacies. Andrea leaned back. "Well, settle in, Vancouver awaits." I suddenly leaned forward. "Can you actually pull over real fast?" Andy raised an eyebrow. "Now?" I placed a paw over my mouth as my stomach lurched. "Now?" "Oh, you better not." I stood hunched over in the grass just a few meters from the bustling interstate, retching. Andy leaned against the car with her arms crossed as she waited. "Now are you done?" I held a paw out toward her without looking over, holding up one digit. "Just, don't drive like that with my sister," I panted. She scoffed. "Sure, queasy." "What?" "Get in the car."